What's going on? This is Theo Gremminger, aka the OG Fantasy, back at it. 2024 Rookie Rankings. Dynasty Rookie Rankings to help you early on in the process. And these rankings are completely updated. Single QB rankings that are incredibly updated. We're in the middle of January right now, but we've got to keep our eyes on the NFL draft, got to keep our eyes on our rookie drafts that are going to drive a lot of our dynasty success. I dropped a video a couple weeks ago, and there's definitely some changes here. You had multiple players declaring for the NFL draft, and you have multiple players who are returning to school, namely Tavion Henderson and Bucky from Ohio State are both heading back to Columbus to be Buckeyes once again. I had both of those guys in my single QB top 10s, so this is going to be reflected some changes here. We also have a couple of exciting guys that declared for the NFL draft. Jonathan Brooks, we're going to talk about him a little bit later on in the show. But I'm going to give you the top 25 ranked players. I'm also going to drop a couple of sleepers that have the ability to crack my top 25 the next time we do a video like this. A couple of guys that are steaming up, whether it's going to be the Senior Bowl, whether that's going to be the NFL Combine, a couple of guys that are very, very intriguing right now to keep. Now, before we start talking about the individual players, let's start talking about this class as a whole. There's a great deal of steam surrounding this 2024 draft class. I think there's a little bit less depth at certain positions than the 2023 class. I don't think we're going to have the tight end 4 or 5 make a big impact. I don't think we're going to have a Puka Nacua situation at the wide receiver spot. But what we do have is star power right at the top. You have multiple quarterbacks, Caleb Williams, Drake May, and Jaden Daniels, that are good enough talents that they're absolute locks to go in my top 25 for single QB leagues. And in super flex leagues, these guys are massively priced. Check out our dynasty rankings at Player Profiler and see where we have Williams, May, and Daniels right now. You also have a couple other quarterbacks who don't crack this ranking, but all are going to be more interesting in Superflex. Now, if you want Superflex rankings, I'm going to drop a Superflex rankings article on playerprofiler.com for this class and record a video like this. But when you look at this class, the quarterback spot is red hot. Then you have the wide receiver spot, and the wide receiver spot is absolutely loaded. Again, the depth is not quite as good as 2023, where we saw all these guys kind of hitting, in the day 3 type guys. But with what this class has dudes, alpha wide receiver ones who are going to have the draft capital, the skill, the size, and the talent to make big impacts in the NFL. And at the wide receiver spot for this class has incredible steam at the top. Marvin Harrison Jr., we're going to talk about him shortly, but you're talking about a player who maybe is the best wide receiver prospect of all time if you look back over the last 20 years. And I don't say that lightly, and I'm not trying to get people to be like, whoa, look at what Theo says. But if you look at where prospects were at this point in the process, Harrison Jr. is right up there. And the enthusiasm for Marvin Harrison Jr. at this point in the draft exceeds where Jamar Chase was a few years back. Got to remember, Jamar Chase sat out that season at LSU. So when he came into the league, people were excited, but not like this. This is different. And right behind Harrison Jr. is Malik Nabers. Malik Nabers also has a ton of steam. We're going to talk about a number of wide receivers who all cracked my top 25 rankings shortly. Then you got the tight end spot. Brock Bowers, one of the best prospects we've seen in quite some time, an absolute megastar in the SEC at Georgia. But he's going to also have incredible draft capital for a tight end. Then behind Bowers, we have Tavion Sanders, and then a considerable drop-off. The spot where people are a little bit worried about is running back. And running back certainly is not where we're going to have a Bijan Robinson or a Jahmyr Gibbs type, and we don't have a Breece Hall type. So there's not a guy at the top that's really carrying the entire class. But I'm going to be a little bit ahead on running backs based on other fantasy analysts, other rankings, and that'll be reflected in my rankings right here. So without further ado, let's get it started. This is my rankings, and I'm going to update this right here, Player Profiler YouTube, throughout the next few months as situations change, as we get more information from the Senior Bowl, from the NFL Combine, and right up to the draft. But we'll start right out at the top here. Marvin Harrison Jr. is the no-brainer of all no-brainers. Generational prospect, elite athlete, incredible catch radius, highly productive, and elite pedigree. Now you want to say athleticism? Marvin Harrison Jr. is an elite athlete. Bruce Feldman's freak list that he drops every single summer at The Athletic, Harrison Jr. is up there. He's going to run a very fast 40. He's going to have a big broad jump. He is going to, if he decides to test for it, he might lead all wide receivers in the bench press. He had an insane bench press numbers for a 20-year-old wide receiver at Ohio State. So I'm not sure if he'll even test for it. A lot of wide receivers opt out. But any way you cut it, this is a flawless prospect. Now, where does Marvin Harrison Jr. fall in Superflex rankings? Superflex, I have him at the 102 right now. But if you are set at the quarterback spot in Superflex, as good a player as Caleb Williams is, I don't have a problem with you taking Harrison Jr. right at the top in your Superflex league. He is a Teflon prospect who's going to be a huge impact in fantasy football for a very long time. Now, where does Marvin Harrison Jr. fall in Dynasty? I think he's wide receiver 5 right out the gate, right behind Jefferson, Chase, Lamb, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Right after that, Marvin Harrison Jr. That's how highly we value him at Player Profiler. And there was a little bit of nervousness that Harrison Jr. would return to Ohio State with all the basically the talent that they're putting together at Ohio State for this 2024 run, and Egbuka and Henderson returning. But that was all just kind of smoke and noise. And Harrison did end up declaring for the NFL draft. So we can breathe a sigh of relief on that. He's going to be picked at the 101 in every single league, in single QB leagues. And my 102 is also incredibly exciting, and that's Malik Nabers. Malik Nabers is a better prospect than any wide receiver in the 2023 class by, considerable margin. He's also probably the wide receiver 1 in 2022 ahead of Garrett Wilson. I can't get in the heads of NFL people, and Garrett Wilson was a top 10 pick in that draft, and that draft also had, Drake London, Chris Olave, multiple guys going in that upper half of the first round, and Wilson still went in the top 10. So I love Garrett Wilson, and our dynasty rankings at Player Profiler reflect that, but Malik Nabers is that sort of player. He is a stud. You can move Malik Nabers all over the lineup. He is incredibly explosive, incredibly versatile, and he's also going to get incredible draft capital. And you talk about Malik Nabers being an LSU wide receiver. And we don't draft people because of where they went to school, but LSU's been crushing it. Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, both top 3, top 4 dynasty wide receivers and top 5 startup picks in single QB leagues, both LSU Tigers. But who holds the record for most receptions in LSU history? Malik Nabers. Who holds the record for most receiving yards in LSU history? Malik Nabers. Malik Nabers is awesome. You should be very, very excited about the 102 in your single QB leagues with Malik Nabers falling in your lap. Number 3 for me, Brock Bowers. And in tight end premium formats like the FFPC, Brock Bowers can be considered at the 102 as much as I love Nabers. I'm still going Nabers over Bowers in FFPC and tight end premium leagues right now, but they're very, very close. And in non-tight end premium, I am still taking Brock Bowers with the 103. Brock Bowers is an absolute superstar. He is going to be let's call him a top 5 dynasty tight end the moment he steps on an NFL field. And you can make an argument as high as the tight end too. You cannot push him past Sam Laporta based on what Sam Laporta has done and what Sam Laporta is. But Brock Bowers, if you have an opportunity to get Brock Bowers on your fantasy team in Dynasty, This is a guy that you can sit back and not worry about the tight end spot for like the next 8 years. He is awesome. And Brock Bowers is more of a hybrid tight end wide receiver that teams can line up all over the field. He can win on the outside. He can win in line. He also had manufactured rushing attempts while at Georgia. They got him the ball in creative ways. He contributed as a true freshman. Brock Bowers is the truth. Awesome tight end prospect. Be very excited about drafting him at the 103. Focal point for 2 national championship teams in the passing game. Then my number 4, Rome Odunze. A little bit of a drop-off from Marvin Harrison and Nabers down to Odunze, but I'm still super excited about him. This is a guy who can make an instant impact on our fantasy teams, our dynasty teams especially. He's got elite size, athleticism, and production. And this season, Washington won the Pac-12, finished the regular season undefeated, beat Texas in the college football playoffs, and Odunze caught 13 touchdown passes. And over the past 2 seasons, he has 151 receptions. He was a big reason why you're seeing Kalen DeBoer coaching in Alabama. I think if Rome Odunze is not on that Washington team, under his roster, I don't think DeBoer gets that Alabama job. That sounds simplistic, but it's players like this that pushed him to this undefeated season. He's a lock to be selected in the first round. Now, exactly how high Odunze goes will be interesting. I think that he's going to be almost a lock to be selected inside the top 20 of the NFL draft, but I personally think when push comes to shove, he will be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, giving him elite draft capital. I think when it's all said and done, these guys are so good in this class that you're going to see Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, Brock Bowers, and Rome Odunze all going inside the top 10. And there's a chance that if I'm wrong on Odunze, he still stays inside of like the top 15, 16 picks in the draft. So that's my top 4. Now you get to 5 overall, and it's flag plant time for me. Really flag plant time for me with 2 players. But number 5 overall for me right now is Troy Franklin of Oregon. And I'll be ahead of consensus on Troy Franklin. And we've seen guys like Troy Franklin, I think they have a little bit more of a range of outcomes than the other wide receivers we've discussed so far in terms of their draft capital. Could Troy Franklin be drafted at the beginning of the second round and not the first round? Sure. But I think he's got some insulation, with like pick 40. He's going to go somewhere in that range where, let's call it pick 18 to pick 40. He'll get very, very good draft capital. And Troy Franklin is absolutely electric in the open field. He is a big-time deep threat, and he was a mega producer at Oregon. The thing about Franklin is he's 6'3", but he's going to weigh in the 180s. And unlike guys like Rome Odunze in this class, and then a couple of wide receivers we're going to talk about later, you're talking about a guy with lower BMI. But we've seen these low BMI, sort of these slim wide receivers have immense fantasy success over the last few years. I don't think there's going to be fear or trepidation from NFL teams with Franklin at all. Jordan Addison last year. You have Tank Dell last year. You have Devonta Smith a couple years back. These guys have come in and made massive impacts in the league, and they've made big impacts right out the gate. The other thing about Franklin is he's going to have the speed. He's going to run somewhere between like a 4.35 and a 4.4. So we're excited about Franklin. I think he'll end up being a first-round pick. I will remain bullish on him. Now, 6 overall for me is Braelon Allen. I had Braelon Allen a little bit lower, but I'm moving him up, especially without Henderson in this class. I think Allen really stands out. And much like Franklin, this is a flag plant for me. I've seen some other fantasy analysts having Braelon Allen, pretty high up in their running back rankings, but not in their overall rankings. So for me, this is a flag plant. And again, I'm open to my rankings being able to change based on draft capital. I'm not going to have take lock with this. I want to stay kind of fluid, but I love Allen. I think Allen is an absolute beast, and I think he's a little bit underrated right now in terms of dynasty. Physical runner with elite production, shined at Wisconsin. And again, we're not chasing the helmet here, but we got to feel pretty good about a guy who comes into Wisconsin and has big-time success. Jonathan Taylor, Melvin Gordon, James White. These guys had multiple fantasy impact seasons coming out of Wisconsin, right out of Madison, Wisconsin, right into our dynasty and redraft lineups. And Allen is a physical presence. He's 6'2", 245, and he's only 19 years old. He will be 20 years old his rookie season in the NFL. He'll immediately be one of the biggest running backs in the league. And in 3 seasons as a Wisconsin Badger, ran for almost 3,500 yards and 35 touchdowns. And I don't think Allen declares early as a 19-year-old if he didn't have guarantee that he'd be a day 2 selection. So I think someone is going to select Braelon Allen at the end of the 2nd round or in the 3rd round. He'll get that valuable day 2 draft capital. And if he lands correctly, he could have a big-time rookie season. He could end up with a lot of rushing touchdowns. Where would I like to see him land? I'd like to see him be a Baltimore Raven. Baltimore tried to trade for Derrick Henry at the trade deadline. They got a ton out of Gus Edwards this season. I think Braelon Allen in that offense would be awesome. Obviously, Dallas would be a great landing spot. There's a few other landing spots where I think Braelon Allen could be really good. And in today's day and age of running back by committee, I think he sort of stands out because this is a guy who I think could handle 18 carries a game, 20 carries a game at some point in his career, hopefully early on. Number 7 overall, I'm going to stick at the running back position. And this is another flag plant for me. And I'm going to go with Blake Corrum. And Blake Corrum moved up in my rankings. He had incredible quality of play in the college football playoffs. Now, I know there was some Donovan Edwards making some explosive plays in that Washington game that really shined out. But when you look at the 2 games collectively against Washington and Alabama, Blake Corrum gave you 40 carries for 217 yards and 3 touchdowns. And he also caught a receiving touchdown against Alabama. He was a major catalyst to Michigan winning the national title, having their dream season where Jim Harbaugh is going to end up being an NFL head coach again. J.J. McCarthy is going to be drafted at the quarterback spot, but it was Blake Corrum basically was the heart and soul of the team, and Blake Corrum was the focal point of their offensive attack. He had an absolute dream season for Michigan, undefeated. When you squint hard and you watch him, you see a little bit of Kenneth Walker to his game. I don't know if he's going to be quite as fast as Kenneth Walker, but he's got that short, compact size that should hold up at the NFL level. I think he also is going to test well in the 40s, in the 40-yard dash. You're talking about a guy, he's not like a burner, but I think he runs fast. So what's the issue with Blake Corrum? 27 touchdowns this season. He's going to run the 40 pretty well. We like the compactness of his size. About 5'8", but he's going to be about 210, 215. It's the age. I think that with Braelon Allen, you're getting a young prospect where we can kind of project a little bit of upside. Where Blake Corrum is more step into the league. This is kind of what he is. But I think NFL teams are going to love Blake Corrum. This is a guy who was a leader at Michigan. This is a guy who is, by all accounts, an incredibly high character guy. And I think that he's going to get that day 2 draft capital. So I like Blake Corrum a lot. I don't think he's ever going to crack like top 5 running back production. I don't think that's in his range of outcomes. But I think he's a guy who can give us multiple seasons of high-end RB2 production, and maybe he has a couple of years where he cracks low-end RB1. I like Blake Corrum. Now, back at number 8 overall, this player's a little bit polarizing. It's Keon Coleman, and he moves up in my rankings. He was, I believe I had him at 9 last time. He moves up to 8. Draft capital is not going to be an issue with him. And there's some people who are projecting Keon Coleman to be drafted among the top 15 picks in the NFL draft. A little bit polarizing with some fantasy analysts. He's got the can't separate knock to him, but he saw his stock rise this year as a transfer from Michigan State, dominated LSU in Florida State's first game of the year. He had 3 touchdown catches against the LSU Tigers. Went on to finish the season with 11 touchdown catches. And Keon Coleman is a big-time athlete. This is a guy who played basketball for Tom Izzo when he was at Michigan State. So again, there's some guys like Matty Kiwoom at Player Profiler, my co-host of Futurecast, does not like Coleman. He's fading Keon Coleman. But I'm going to take an open mind. I think NFL teams don't see those sort of issues. And I think there's a chance that Keon Coleman could land very, very well. Again, a 20-year-old player with this sort of production, this sort of alpha outside wide receiver body and frame. I think there's a chance that he could take off as an NFL pro. Then sticking at the wide receiver position with my number 9 overall player, and that's Adonai Mitchell. Love Mitchell. T. Higgins-like profile, size and athleticism. He caught 29 passes on a loaded Georgia team as a true freshman. Then this year, transfers to Texas, catches 10 touchdowns in his first season as a Texas Longhorn, and that's alongside Xavier Worthy, alongside Tavion Sanders, and alongside Jonathan Brooks. There was a ton of talent on that Texas team, and Adonai Mitchell caught 10 touchdown passes with them. Should run a low 4.5 40 and has a chance to hear his name called in the first round. Declared for the NFL draft, which was unsurprising, but we're talking about a big, physical, fast wide receiver with his sort of production. These guys rarely make it outside of the top 40 in the NFL draft, and he'll be a very appealing option for some of these teams in the back third of the first round. And the cool thing about Adonai Mitchell, he caught a touchdown pass in 3 straight college football playoffs, which is just wild. 2 for Georgia, 1 this year for Texas against Washington. Now, at number 10 overall for me, it's Caleb Williams. He's my number 1 ranked player in Superflex, but in single QBs, I'm going to have him at 10. And I could have him a little bit higher because I think this is a consideration anywhere from the 1.7 overall. He's that special of a prospect. Staggering statistics, 93 touchdown passes at Oklahoma and USC, won the Heisman Trophy in his sophomore season, and he would have been the top quarterback selected in 2023 if he was eligible. Would have been selected ahead of Bryce Young, ahead of CJ Stroud, ahead of Anthony Richardson. Now it's kind of like the prospect fatigue sets in. When he was a sophomore, people were calling him Patrick Mahomes. Now, as a junior, USC loses a few games. His play is not quite as dynamic as in year 2, and some are trying to poke holes in Caleb Williams. I am not. I think Caleb Williams is absolutely special. When you watch Caleb Williams play, he does things that are just fantastic. He can make incredible passes while he's on the move. He has sneaky athleticism, where I think he could be an opportunistic scrambler in the NFL. He's incredibly accurate. He has an incredible deep ball. So like Caleb Williams, this guy is an absolute winner. And this is the sort of guy that elevates his teammates around him. I think it's not out of the question that he could have a CJ Stroud-like impact in year 1 and finish as a QB1 in PPR or whatever scoring format you have. And in Superflex, incredibly valuable. But it's okay to use a early rookie pick on him in single QB because I think he'll be that impactful of a player. We don't want to draft quarterbacks super early in single QB if they're sort of a replacement level guy, but Caleb is anything but that. This is a guy who could have multiple top 5 seasons as a pro fantasy scoring wise. Love Caleb Williams. Number 11 for me, sticking with the Texas Longhorns, and it's going to be Xavier Worthy. Worthy has elite speed, and he will finish his Longhorns career with 26 touchdown catches. That's the 3rd most in Texas history. They've had a couple of good wide receivers walk in the door at Texas and a couple of fantastic players in that program. So for him to finish right there in the record books is noteworthy. And I think Xavier Worthy is going to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft. He has a chance to run one of the fastest 40 times in the entire NFL draft at the wide receiver position. Xavier Worthy can fly. This is a really fun prospect, a really, really good outcome player for you if you are a team that won this year and is holding a back end of the first round, high-end second round pick. Really, really a nice player to add to your dynasty roster. And then my next player at 12 overall, I feel like I'm too low on him because I think at the end of the day, this is a player that NFL teams are going to look at and they're going to want to move up. And I think he's might get drafted ahead of like the Coleman, Mitchell, and Worthy when it's all said and done. But right now I have him at 12 overall, so I'm still really bullish on him, but I think that the market might be even a little bit more ahead of me on Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. The alpha-sized wide receiver, big-time X receiver, a clear outside wide receiver in the league. And even with Malik Nabers on his team, like, my number 2 overall prospect and a guy that is realistically probably a dynasty wide receiver 1 right now. Even with Malik Nabers on the field, Thomas had an unbelievable season for LSU. He finished with 17 touchdown catches. 17 touchdown catches is the 5th most in SEC history. And that's the 3rd most in LSU history behind, you guessed it, Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. So 17 touchdown catches. And in the one game without Malik Nabers this year, where Thomas decided to play in LSU's bowl game against Wisconsin, New Year's Day Bowl, really entertaining game. It was like a 35-31 win for LSU. Thomas had, you guessed it, 2 touchdown catches. So Brian Thomas, I think, is going to have the draft capital. Brian Thomas has the pedigree, and Brian Thomas has the production as a collegiate. So look for Brian Thomas. That's going to be like a very cool thing to debate. He could get up as high as the Troy Franklin range, and he's insulated where he couldn't really be too much lower than this because I think the draft capital is going to catch up to him. Really exciting wide receiver class. Really, really interesting to try to rank these guys. I kind of want a lot of these guys on my dynasty teams, so they all kind of make my first round. So we're now into the second round here. If we were doing a regular single QB dynasty rookie draft, but just to quickly recap my 1 through 12: Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, Brock Bowers, Rome Odunze, Troy Franklin, then a pair of Big Ten running backs, Braelon Allen and Blake Corrum, then Keon Coleman at Florida State, Adonai Mitchell, Caleb Williams, Xavier Worthy, and Brian Thomas. Now, starting right here at the 201, 13 overall, I'm going to go back to the tight end with Tavion Sanders. A little bit under the radar right now because of Brock Bowers, but Sanders is a tremendous prospect and an exciting long-term answer for fantasy managers needing a tight end. He's only 20 years old as well, so Sanders has that unknown upside because of his youth. He broke the Texas record for tight end receptions in his sophomore season. He had 54 of them. Then this year, his production took a little bit of a back seat because, again, they had so many dudes at Texas. Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, and Jonathan Brooks. So Jatavian Sanders still put up numbers, but not quite like his sophomore season. I think that Sanders, this is a really good spot for, because I think he has that sort of impact where he could step in and be a long-term answer for you at tight end. You also have a considerable gap between Sanders and tight end 3. I have my tight end 3 I'm going to talk about in the sleepers, but that could really change. Sanders, I think he has a chance to sneak into the first round of the NFL draft. There's a couple teams at that back end of the first round who could consider Sanders. This could be a year that we have 2 tight ends selected in the first round of the NFL draft. Then my 14th overall player, this is really going to start being a running back range. I have 3 running backs in a row. I have 4 running backs in this second round that I'm really, really excited about. And Allen and Corrum are ahead of these guys, but these guys I really like. And this is why second round picks are so valuable to you right now. But one guy we got to talk about is Trey Benson. And anybody who follows Player Profiler knows, the value of athleticism and size at the running back position in how we've evaluated people over the years. And one of the truest tests of this in this draft is going to be Trey Benson. Benson is going to run a sub 4.4 40-yard dash. He clocked in at 22 miles per hour in a game this season, which is lightning fast. He also has size at the position. So you're talking about a size, speed combination running back who was also very, very productive at Florida State. He had the first 200-yard rushing game for a Florida State Seminole since Dalvin Cook. And he showed improvement as a receiver out of the backfield this season. He caught 20 balls. So he's not known for that particularly, but I think that skill set will correlate at the NFL level. So Trey Benson, unlike some of the other running backs where when you rank running backs this early in the process, sometimes you get burned with the draft capital. I don't think that'll be the case with Benson. I think Benson, with his elite athleticism, unless something shows up in the physical, because he did have, former surgeries and injury concerns earlier on in his career. Unless something shows up in the physical, I think Benson's going to be selected in the second or third round of the NFL draft. And again, I have him at 14 overall. Sticking at the running back position at 15 overall is Audric Estime. And Audric Estime is also a 20-year-old back with great size. So a little bit older than Braelon Allen, but he's also going to play somewhere in that, let's call it 225 to 235 range. Not sure what he'll be weight-wise at the NFL Combine, but he is a big, strong, physical running back with big-time home run hitting breakaway ability. He had an 80-yard touchdown run against NC State. He broke off the game winner against Duke and took it to the house in a tight ball game. Like, he had timely touchdown runs for Notre Dame all season long. And he ended the season with 18 rushing touchdowns, which is a single season record for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. That's wild. You're talking about Notre Dame here, a storied program that's had so many great running backs come in through the gate, guys like Jerome Bettis, and Audric Estime is the one with the most touchdowns in any season with 18. So Estime is a guy that I think is gaining some steam. I think there's not enough dynasty love for Estime right now, but this is a guy, when it's all said and done, I do think will be a late day 2 pick and has a chance. If he falls out of day 2, I don't think there's any chance he falls out of like the early 4th round where we've seen guys have success. But if I had to bet money on it, I think he's going to go somewhere in that late 2nd to the end of the 3rd range and get that day 2 draft capital. Just too productive and too much home run hitting ability. And again, he's a younger back. But, again, we got to be careful this early on in the process when trying to evaluate some of these running backs. We don't want to get caught up too hard because the draft capital can sometimes be disappointing. But I love Estime. I'm willing to be excited about him right now. And another running back that I'm going to flag plant for that I just love is Bucky Irving. And unlike some of these other running backs that I've discussed, Bucky Irving is small. This is a guy that I think is going to weigh like 190 pounds at Oregon. Coming out of Oregon, he's going to be 190 pounds, and he's like this year's version of pick. Like, so he's going to be this year's version of. You're going to hear all these analysts say that like Devon Achane, Jahmyr Gibbs, Keaton Mitchell, James Cook. We've had all these guys come through like the last 2 years, and Bucky Irving is this year's guy. I don't know about that. I think he's a unique player, but again, there's less trepidation to chase an outlier when we're seeing it from multiple guys. Kyron Williams, also a smaller back. So this year we had big time success from these sub 195 pound running backs in the NFL this year. And Irving kind of falls in line with that. This is a guy who has big time receiving ability. He led college football in running back receptions with 53. That's a big time number. And he ends up with over 1,400 combined yards this season for the Ducks. This is a guy where you hear the term high-value touches. I think that Bucky Irving is the high-value touch guy. Even if he lands in a situation where he's in a committee, he's going to be the one getting the targets. He's going to get valuable outside runs. And this is the kind of guy that smart offensive coordinators are going to try to get out in space. I love Bucky Irving's fantasy potential. And this is a guy that I think is going to remain in the 2nd round because of his size. So I'm going to flag plant Bucky Irving right here. Then 17 overall is another wide receiver, and this is an interesting one, but it's Xavier Legette. And I've seen Xavier Legette mocked as high as the NFL 1st round. He's got a weird profile. And when I say weird, it's not because of his size. He's got alpha size. He's 6'3", 225. It's not because of his athleticism. He's by all accounts a big-time athlete, but it's the age. Unlike a lot of these wide receivers where most of the guys I'm talking about are like 21, 20 years old, Xavier Legette will be 23 years old at the time of the NFL draft. He also did not break out early at South Carolina. He has like a huge year this past year and kind of minimal production in the years before. But that being said, I think NFL teams are really coming around on Legette. This is a guy that is looked at sort of like a late bloomer rather than a guy who was disappointing and then all of a sudden did well because he's 22 going against a bunch of 20-year-olds. I'm kind of in the middle on him. I think where I rank him makes sense, where you're not using necessarily a higher premium pick. This would be more of a mid-2nd round type pick where some people are going to have him higher than me. Some people are going to have him lower than me. So I'd say that I'm kind of neutral in consensus. I'll say that Cody Carpenter and Matty Kiwoom, I podcasted with them for 2 FutureCast drafts, and both those guys love Legit. So he's one to definitely keep an eye on. Let's see where the draft capital is on him. If he ends up sneaking in the NFL first round, we have to consider moving him up, despite the late breakout, despite the age. Then at 18 overall, in Superflex, this becomes a real argument. But I have Jaden Daniels and Drake May back-to-back right here. And Jaden Daniels, I have ranked ahead of Drake May right now for single QB dynasty rankings. Jaden Daniels has exceptional rushing ability. He ran for over 2,000 yards and 21 touchdowns the past 2 seasons, won the Heisman. If you looked at fantasy points per game, if we were like trying to say fantasy points per game for college players, Jaden Daniels led the country with over 40 points per game scored at the quarterback position. Wild scoring from him. And Jaden Daniels, I think, is going to run the 40 in the 4.4s. He's going to be drafted inside the top 10 picks. Immense fantasy potential. And you talk about touchdown passes, passed for 40 touchdowns. So you're talking about a guy who big time production, big time speed, big time fantasy potential. But if you're a little bit more nervous and want to have another quarterback option, Drake May. Drake May is going to be a long-time NFL starter. He's my number 19 overall ranked player. He has an absolute cannon for an arm. He is incredibly accurate. And there's reports that he's going to run a sub 4.7 40. Like Drake May has like Caleb Williams, I think Drake May is going to put up rushing numbers in the NFL as well. And I think Drake May is going to have some design runs in his future as well. Like Drake May can move. He's got the size. He's going to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. Both of these guys, Daniels and May, and certainly Caleb Williams, all should be valued extremely highly in any dynasty format you're in, because I think these guys are really good NFL prospects at the quarterback position. 20 overall, and this is one where some people are going to be very angry about this ranking, but Jonathan Brooks is 20 overall for me. And I think some people are going to say, Theo, you should move him to running back 1 in your rankings. And I think if he didn't get hurt, he would definitely be there. If he didn't get hurt all season, Jonathan Brooks would probably be closer to 5 than 20 in this ranking. And I'm willing to move him up, but I want to see the progress with his injury because he declares for the NFL draft. This is a guy, Jonathan Brooks, that has size, vision, explosiveness. He also has talent as a receiver out of the backfield. And when you look at his stats, this is a guy whose yards per carry were almost identical to Bijan Robinson last year. So Jonathan Brooks checks us off every single box, but he tore his ACL this season. He's still declared for the NFL draft. And if we're giving him a 9-month timeline, then Jonathan Brooks could be ready for game 1 of the NFL season. If there's a little bit of a setback, then you're talking about losing some time. So when we get to the torn ACL, it's definitely not as scary as it was years ago. And I'm open-minded to being able to move Jonathan Brooks as high as my RB1 in my rankings. And that's where he would have been pre-injury. But the other guys don't have the injury concerns right now that Brooks has. That's the only reason I'm keeping him here at 20. But if we get positive vibes from his injuries over the next few weeks, I am ready to move Jonathan Brooks up. And I actually think it would be huge for this class to have Jonathan Brooks move up, because I think it's going to make the dynasty community kind of come around on this running back position a little bit more in this class. So Jonathan Brooks is 20 with an asterisk. Chance to move up, but I want to check out and see how the progress is going from the torn ACL. 21 overall for me. This is a guy who, when I wrote my first article and did this first video, I thought that he might return to Georgia, but it's Ladd McConkey. And Ladd McConkey has a chance to be selected on day 2 or higher. There's some who think Ladd McConkey is going to be an NFL first-round pick. Elite route runner, and he also broke in as a freshman at Georgia, true freshman. So many have mocked McConkey as like a first-rounder, and this ranking could look a little low if he goes there. But, you know, he played in the bowl game for Georgia against Florida State. I think he really pondered this decision. And then, again, speculation he was going to return, but now he heads to the league, probable high draft capital guy. And there's no chance he falls outside of the second round. He's going to go in the first or the second. And there's some buzz with McConkey. Despite a deep wide receiver class, there's still a great deal of interest in McConkey. So like Brooks, I'll keep an open mind for moving him up, but I don't think he has the fantasy ceiling of a couple of the players that I mentioned at the top. But I am open-minded for moving, McConkey inside my top 15 in this ranking. Then 22 overall, this is a guy that I'm actually super excited about to see how he does at the Senior Bowl. There's a chance he could fall out of this ranking because, again, he's small, but Jacob Cowing. He projects as an immediate contributor out of the slot for an NFL team. And you're going to, like we talked about with Bucky Irving, we're going to see all these fantasy analysts saying oh, Bucky Irving's the next, he's not Devon Achane, but he's the next, Devon Achane, Jahmyr Gibbs, Keaton Mitchell, the next sub 190-pound running back to make an impact. You're going to see so many Jacob Cowing is this year's Tank Dell comparisons. It's not even funny. And Jacob Cowing was a big time producer for Arizona. And on the way out in the Alamo Bowl against Oklahoma, he shredded the Sooners. 152 receiving yards and 2 touchdown grabs. Now Jacob Cowing goes to the Senior Bowl. I think if he shreds the Senior Bowl competition and has a really big week down in Mobile, I think there's a chance that this becomes solidified and there'll be a great deal of buzz, a great deal of steam behind him. 23 overall, I'm sticking at the wide receiver spot, and that's Jalen Polk. And Jalen Polk seems like a really safe prospect. He's got the size, he's got the pedigree. Washington Husky alongside Rome Odunze and also alongside Jalen McMillan, who just missed making it on this initial video. But the Huskies had 3 really good wide receivers this year. And Jalen Polk has great size. He's also got great hands. Question marks about his straight line speed, but I think he can step onto an NFL team and contribute. Projects to be an early day 2 selection. I think you'll see him hear his name inside the second round. Now, at 24 overall, I'm going to go with a tie, and it's kind of a cop-out, but I want to get both these guys on my list. And Will Shipley from Clemson, this is a guy that I speculated in my last article. I had him listed as ones to watch because I thought there was a chance that he could return to Clemson, but he ends up declaring for the NFL draft. There's a complete lack of buzz with Will Shipley, but he can be a productive back in the NFL. I think he's going to immediately slot in as a third down back with plus, and for whatever team drafts him. He's highly effective in the screen game. If he lands correctly, he can immediately put up solid reception numbers as a receiver. And then as a runner for Clemson, he broke out as a true freshman, and he ran for almost 2,800 yards and 31 touchdowns in 3 years as a Clemson Tiger. And then the other player that I have ranked at 24 tied is a running back that I really like. And again, I think this is a guy that there's a lack of buzz on, but it's Marshawn Lloyd. Marshawn Lloyd is out of USC. He spent only 1 season there, but it was a highly productive run. He has a physical running style, and he's also got low tread on the tires. Not a whole lot of career carries, unlike some guys where they get to the NFL and you feel like the college team they're coming from, took a little bit out of them. Lloyd should have some freshness there. Compact frame, and he also averaged nearly 18 yards per reception this year. So there could be something there as a receiver. He's one that I want to keep an eye on. Again, we need the draft capital on Marshawn Lloyd. Whereas Shipley, I have less concerns about the draft capital. I think he's a guy that lands somewhere in that 4th round or higher. So I'm a little less concerned there. Now let's talk sleepers. And these guys are not really sleepers. You're watching player profiler videos, and if you're watching rookie draft videos in January, then you know ball. But a couple guys that could really crack this top 25 for me next time I record that I'm willing to move up in these rankings. First guy is Malachi Corley. And Malachi Corley's a wide receiver out of Western Kentucky, and he's a really fun player. I think he's going to check off a lot of boxes for us here at Player Profiler. There's some buzz in NFL mock draft circles that he could be drafted as high as round 2. He's built like a running back. So there's some speculation that NFL teams might view him as a Curtis Samuel or Deebo Samuel type, where you can use him as a wide receiver, but manufacture rushing attempts for with that great frame he has. He's also expected to run the 40 in the 4.4s. He scored 11 touchdowns this year for the Hilltoppers. So keep an eye on Malachi Corley, another player who we got to keep an eye on because it'll be interesting to see how NFL teams treat him. But it's Johnny Wilson of Florida State. There's no NFL comparison. He breaks the mold in terms of size and speed. He's about 6'7". I think he'll easily measure in at 6'6" at the combine. The Florida State listed him 6'7", and he's got wheels. And there's more likely, the more likely outcome for a guy like that is he becomes a role player and a threat in the red zone for teams, maybe a deep threat. But there's also a chance that he lands on a team with a creative offensive coordinator who's like, okay, I can work with that. So we want to keep an eye on Johnny Wilson's landing spot and his draft capital, but definitely an outlier in terms of size and speed. Another player to watch at the Senior Bowl, small college running back, and that's Dylan Lobb of New Hampshire. He's an FCS mega producer, and now he heads to the Senior Bowl with a chance to make a big name for himself. Led the nation in all-purpose yardage as a junior, and this year as a senior, he caught 68 passes. So this is a guy that I think there could be real buzz for after Mobile, and if there's not, he's not in our top 25, we'll move on. But I'm willing to bet that he has a solid week down there. Another wide receiver who makes this list, Jermaine Burton. Jermaine Burton, Alabama wide receiver. He has NFL speed and could be drafted as highly as the second round. His production never caught up with his athleticism in college, but I'll be interested to see just how fast Jermaine Burton runs the 40 in. At a Nike event when he was a senior in high school, and these Nike events are pretty legit with the times. If somebody says they ran a 4.4 in high school, usually you have to raise an eyebrow. You're thinking it's a high school coach, with a stopwatch. But when it's a Nike event, these times are usually pretty strong and accurate. And Burton apparently ran a 4.43 when he was a senior in high school. So we'll be interested to see if he gains some, 40-yard dash speed in his time at Alabama. But he could come out and run a kind of surprisingly fast 40. Deep threat with athleticism, good chance for day 2 draft capital. So we'll keep an eye on him. But again, we would have liked to see a little more production. Then we got to talk about Dylan Johnson. Dylan Johnson was a 1-year standout for an undefeated Huskies team. He'll be an intriguing prospect with 3 down potential. Rushed for 256 yards against USC and 152 against Oregon in the Pac-12 title game. Johnson played through nagging injuries in the college football playoffs, so displayed some grit and toughness. The production was not really there, but he did catch 5 passes in 2 games. I'm open to moving him up in the rankings, but again, Dylan Johnson's a guy who I also think could lack the draft capital, but we're going to keep him on the list and kind of keep an eye on him throughout this process. Then the potential tight end 3 in this class, and a guy who I think could gain a lot of steam at the combine, is Theo Johnson of Penn State. I'm not just saying it because I like the first name Theo. There's not enough of us out in the NFL or in football, but Theo Johnson is a big-time athlete. He's it's kind of hard to compare him, but this guy has elite measurables, and he also caught 7 touchdown passes for the Nittany Lions this year. But it's not the production. It's not saying, this is a guy who people see as some sort of an archetype, but it's the size-speed combination. He's 6'5", 260, and reportedly runs in the 4.5s. And there's some reports out of Penn State he could be like a mid 4.5 guy. So if he's 6'5", 260 with a 4.55, there's going to be a lot of NFL teams, lining up to try to see what they can do with that. Then the last player who's a sleeper, Tez Walker out of UNC, wide receiver. Great size, 6'2", 200 pounds, potential to be a day 2 guy, potential to sneak into the second round. Only 1 year at UNC after transferring from Kent State, and he caught 7 touchdown passes for the Tar Heels. So wraps it up. This was a long video. This was not for people looking for short-term content, short-form content. This is for you real ones out there who want to really deep dive into this rookie class. And we're going to bring you a ton of content like this on my shows, Dynasty Life, Sonic Truth, Futurecast. And also here on Player Profiler YouTube, I'm going to be dropping videos like this all off season. Make sure you're subscribing. Make sure you hit the like button. Give you a quick rundown. My overall rankings: Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, Brock Bowers, Roma Dunze, Troy Franklin, Braelon Allen, Blake Corrum, Keon Coleman, Adonai Mitchell, Caleb Williams, Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas. That wraps up the first round, the top 12. Then my second round, Tavion Sanders, Trey Benson, Audric Estime, Bucky Irving, Xavier Legette, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Jonathan Brooks, Ladd McConkey, Jacob Cowing, Jalen Polk, Will Shipley, and Marshawn Lloyd. We dropped a few sleepers as well. Follow me on Twitter at the OG Fantasy and check out all of my written work at playerprofiler.com. I'm going to drop the article version of this video right here in the show description, and stick with us here at Player Profiler all season long. We got you covered for everything you need to know in the 2024 class and all of your fantasy.